2 letters, as it turned out, could rearrange a person's life more thoroughly than a prairie windstorm. Etta Pym discovered this at precisely 10:30 on a Tuesday, standing in the narrow doorway of the Caldwell Flats post office with a carpetbag at her feet and a folded letter in her gloved hand. The letter had been addressed to her in careful block print and signed by a Mr. Harold Teague, who described himself as a widower with a modest homestead north of town and a need for a wife who could manage accounts. Etta managed accounts. She had been doing so for 14 years at Pym & Sons Dry Goods until the Sons sold the business and the goods and left her in Hatchet Creek with impressive ledger skills and no ledger to keep. She had answered Harold Teague's advertisement in good faith and travelled 3 days by coach on roads that clearly had strong opinions about their own condition. She was 38 years old, practical, and not given to romantical notions. She had told herself this arrangement was sensible, and she had believed it entirely, right up until this moment. What she had not arranged for was the man leaning against the post office counter. He was tall in the angular way of men who have spent years in saddles, with sun-browned skin and a hat that had seen better decades. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone who has walked into the wrong room, with a flicker of something between recognition and confusion. "You'd be the widow Pym," he said. "I would." She studied him. He was not what she had pictured from Harold Teague's careful penmanship. "And you are Mr. Teague?" Something shifted in his expression. "No, ma'am. I'm Shay Donnelly. I run cattle about 6 miles east." He reached under the brim of his hat and scratched the back of his neck. "I believe there's been a mix-up." Etta set her carpetbag down more firmly than was strictly necessary. Shay Donnelly laid it out simply. He had written a letter to a widow in Hatchet Creek, a woman named May Cotter, who had advertised for a correspondent willing to discuss scripture and livestock management. He had received back a letter about ledger accounting and a firm handshake, and been told to expect her arrival on Tuesday. He had come to meet her because he was raised to follow through on things, and because young Bert Whitmore at the counter had assured him with absolute confidence that the morning letters were sorted correctly. Etta unfolded her letter. She read it again, then she looked at him. "Harold Teague's letter mentions a fondness for cattle," she said slowly. "My letter mentioned needing someone good with sums," he said just as slowly. They looked at each other for a moment with the particular shared expression of 2 people who have realized they are standing in the same ridiculous situation. "The postmaster," Etta said. "Young Bert," Shay agreed. He sorted the morning bag with one hand and a ham-biscuit in the other. Etta looked at the letter in her hand. She looked at her carpetbag. She looked at the door, which framed a wide and unhelpful expanse of prairie. "Well," she said, "I have come 3 days by coach." "And I've come 6 miles in the heat," he said. "Least I can do is buy you a meal while we sort it." It was not a grand gesture, but it was offered without any complicated motive she could detect, which Etta had learned to appreciate in people. She picked up her carpetbag. "Lead on, Mr. Donnelly." The meal at Haskell's was fried chicken and corn, which Shay Donnelly ate with the straightforward attention of a man who respected food. Etta found this agreeable. She had been married once to a man who narrated his own opinions throughout every meal, and the comfortable silence Shay offered was companionable rather than cold. He asked her about the dry goods business. She told him more than she meant to, about the pleasure of a well-kept ledger, the way a column of numbers could be trusted in a way that people sometimes could not. He listened without interrupting, which she had not been expecting from a cowboy who looked as though he spent most of his days outdoors and his evenings falling asleep over supper. She asked about the cattle. He told her about the summer drought, about the 2 hands he'd lost to the silver mines in Nevada, about a particular cow named Duchess who had strong opinions about fence lines. He described Duchess with a dry fondness that made Etta press her lips together to keep from smiling and fail entirely. You laughed, he observed. I smiled, she corrected. Your eyes laughed, he said, and then looked as though he hadn't meant to say it quite that plainly. He turned his attention to his corn. Etta let the moment settle. She was not a woman who made much of compliments, but she noted this one, the way she noted a figure that didn't quite fit the expected column, worth a second look. After the meal they walked the length of the single main street, because there was nothing else to do, and the coach back to Hatchet Creek didn't run until Thursday. The afternoon light came golden sideways across the boardwalk, turning the dust motes into something almost pretty. A few townspeople passed and offered polite nods. Shay touched the brim of his hat to each of them, unhurried, comfortable in his own skin the way that some men simply were and others spent their whole lives trying to be. He told her about the homestead, the house that needed a second window, the kitchen garden that had mostly given up in the heat, the way the land looked at dusk when the light came exactly right, and the grass went the color of a new penny. He described it the way a person describes something they love quietly, without expecting anyone else to understand. Etta understood. She had loved the dry goods store that way. She had never told anyone. She told him now, briefly, the way a person tests unfamiliar ground before committing weight to it. He did not tell her she was silly for loving a set of account books and a reliable inventory system. He said it sounded like she had built something real, and that losing it to someone else's decision was a hard thing to carry. It was the most precisely correct response anyone had offered her in 2 years. By the time they reached the far end of the boardwalk and stood looking out at the late afternoon prairie, something had shifted between them, not loudly. Prairie things rarely announced themselves. What happens Thursday? She said, not quite a question. He was quiet a moment, eyes on the horizon. You go back to Hatchet Creek. I go back to the homestead. May Cotter sends a letter to Harold Teague, and Harold Teague writes you a proper letter, and young Bert Whitmore is no longer trusted with the morning bag. That is the correct sequence of events, Etta said. Neither of them moved. She looked at the letter still folded in her coat pocket. Her good faith answer to a stranger's advertisement, carried 3 days by coach. She had come here prepared to be sensible. She had not come prepared for a man who listened, who described a difficult cow with tenderness, who noticed when her eyes laughed. She had not come prepared to feel, at the end of a single afternoon in a town she had never visited, that she might be standing in exactly the right place, even if she had arrived by entirely the wrong route. Shay turned to look at her, and the look on his face was honest in a way that cost him something. I know this is not how any of this was supposed to go, he said quietly. I know you came here for a settled arrangement with a man who runs a decent homestead. I run a decent homestead. I just wasn't the man you wrote to. No, Etta agreed. You answered the wrong letter. And you came to meet the wrong man. Apparently. He exhaled slowly, squinting at the horizon the way a man does when he's deciding how brave to be. Would it change anything? He said carefully. If I told you the wrong man has been thinking all afternoon that Bert Whitmore may have done him the greatest favor of his life. Etta was quiet for long enough that a hawk crossed the sky from south to north and disappeared. It would depend somewhat, she said, on whether the wrong man would be willing to let me look at his account books. Shay Donnelly looked at her steadily. My account books are a disaster, he said honestly. I know, she said. I could tell from the way you described the kitchen garden. A man who tracks his cows by name and not by number has no system. I have some system. You have intention. That's different. She turned to face him more fully, and her expression had settled into something warm and direct. I would need to see the house. I would need 2 weeks to determine whether the kitchen garden is salvageable. I make no promises about anything beyond that. Something in his face went very still and then very warm. 2 weeks is fair, he said. And you will write to Harold Teague yourself, she added, to explain. I will. And someone will inform May Cotter. I'll see to it personally. Etta nodded, the way she nodded when a column of numbers finally resolved into cents. Then I don't believe I need the Thursday coach after all. The sun was going down behind the water tower, painting the street copper and quiet. Shay Donnelly reached over and took her carpetbag from her, not dramatically, just the way a person picks up something heavy that someone else has been carrying too long. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. 6 months later, in the kitchen of a homestead with a new second window and a garden that had rallied considerably under proper attention and a reliable watering schedule, Etta Pym, who had become Etta Donnelly on a bright October morning, before a justice of the peace and 2 bemused ranch hands, ruled 2 columns of figures in a brand new ledger and drew a clean line under the total. The numbers balanced. They always balanced when the foundation was honest. In the yard, she could hear Shay talking to Duchess, who was apparently testing the fence line again. His voice carried the same dry and patient fondness he turned on most things: the cattle, the land, the wife who had arrived for someone else entirely and decided, after 2 weeks and a thorough look at those account books, to stay permanently. Etta set down her pen and looked out the new window at the afternoon light falling golden across the grass. Some mistakes, she thought, you correct the moment you find them. And some you hold on to with both hands, because the best thing you ever found came wrapped in someone else's envelope, traveled 3 days by coach on bad roads, and walked into a post office in Caldwell Flats on a Tuesday when a young postmaster had a ham biscuit in one hand and the morning letters in the other. She picked up her pen and wrote Donnelly at the top of the new ledger page in her clearest and most deliberate hand. It fit there just right.